Today, in part two, we will shed a light on lesser known facts and historical gems that give us a fascinating insight into Ireland, its people, and its past. We are pleased to have today live from London, England, Christopher Wynn, freelance writer, collector of trivia, quiz master, and theater and television producer. He will share some of the myths, legends, adventures, and inventions included in his book, I Never Knew That About Ireland. We will also have a giveaway today for 3 lucky attendees at the end of today's program. A copy of today's presenter, Christopher Wynn's book, I Never Knew That About Ireland. Before we go further into today's program, I would like to do some housekeeping. As always, keep your microphones on mute throughout the entire program. Please send all of your questions to the chat room. The chat room will be monitored, and we will work to make sure all of your questions are answered in an orderly fashion. This session will be recorded, and you will be able to view this program later on demand. The program from the first part of the Irish American Heritage Month series is now available on demand. And speaking of on-demand recordings, you will be notified soon of today's program's availability and all of our recent programs when they're ready to be viewed. We are also pleased to announce the following upcoming programs. Women's History Month, March the 7th. The anniversary of Executive Order 92, Part 1 on March the 17th, and Part 2 on March the 20th. We look forward to seeing you there. I'm going to turn the program over to my colleague at OSHR, Lisa Coffey, and she will introduce today's speaker. Lisa?
Been a writer for over 40 years, writing mainly about travel and history, and he contributes articles for the Daily Telegraph in London, as well as other national newspapers and magazines, such as The Spectator. He also sets quizzes for several newspapers, television shows, and company events. Christopher has worked in television, spending 10 years as an editorial assistant to the BBC's top presenter during the 1980s and 90s. Irish broadcaster Terry Wogan on his popular thrice weekly live talk show for the BBC, as well as producing a travel show based on his books for independent television. I Never Knew That About Ireland is the second in a series of 16 I Never Knew That books covering Britain and Ireland, including I Never Knew About the Irish and I Never Knew That About New York. He's joining us today from London, where he lives with his equally talented wife, Mai, who illustrates his books. Also, I'm happy to say that 3 lucky attendees will win a copy of Christopher Wynn's book, I Never Knew That About Ireland. Winners will be announced at the end of today's program. Okay, without further ado, Christopher, I will turn the program over to you. Welcome and thank you.
Hello, Lisa, and hello, everybody, and thank you very much for inviting me to talk to you. It's a great honor and privilege, all the way from England. So I'm going to talk to you today about this book, I Never Knew That About Ireland. And if you'll forgive me, I'm going to read out, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to read out the preface, because I think that sums up Ireland in the best way I can think of. The wonderful country of Ireland that is the most mysterious and beautiful country, right on the western edge of Europe. And when you stand on the wonderful cliffs of Moher on the west coast of Ireland, they fall over 600 feet straight into the sea, but there is nothing between you and America. And I feel that's rather an inspiring place to stand. But if you'll forgive me, I'll just read out from the preface to start with. Ireland is like nowhere else. Ireland is magnificent, mischievous, moody, and misunderstood. It is Europe's furthest west, the edge of the known world, a step too far for the Romans, a land wreathed in mist and mystery. In the Dark Ages, when Europe was stumbling around in ignorance, Ireland burned bright as a centre of learning and civilization. From Ireland came forth saints and scholars to spread their wisdom and their knowledge. Celts and kings, druids and wise men have left their memories carved in stone on crosses and decorated arches. Treasures that in any other land would be scrubbed clean of history, fenced off, subsumed by car parks and gift shops. But in Ireland, they are just there, left as they were meant to be, majestic, haunting, and rooted in their landscape. Ireland has a landscape to rival anywhere, from Europe's highest cliffs and wildest shores to the languid, lacustrine plains of the heartlands. The beauty of her scenery and the power of her legends has produced some of the world's great literature, poetry, and music, and all is touched by a turbulent history, with a tinge of melancholy, a frisson of menace, and undercurrent of defiance. But Ireland is also a modern country, forward-looking, energetic, alive with ideas and inspiration, drawing upon a legacy of innovation and inventiveness second to none. And it is this combination that makes Ireland so intriguing, so alluring, and so addictive. And I stand by every word of that. Ireland is the most intriguing country. And when I first started writing my books, I never knew that books. About 20 years ago, I did England first because that's where I live and the country I know best. But I always had a yearning to do Ireland. So Ireland was my next book because although I'd been there several times, I knew very little about it. And yet it had this strange mystery and allure, sort of lost in the mist on the western edge of civilization as we sort of think about it in Europe. And I think the best description of Ireland is the famous one of calling it the Emerald Isle, because that sums it up to me, green and precious. And Emerald Isle was, of course, coined by a politician and a poet called William Drennan in a poem he wrote in 1795 called When Erin First Rose. And Emerald Isle summed it up so beautifully that it's been the name given to Ireland ever since. And Ireland is one of those places that overcomes you when you visit it. And I thought I was very lucky to have some friends who had a house beside Loch Ree in County Longford, which is right in the middle of Ireland, a little place called Barley Harbour near Newton Cashel. And Newton Cashel is very famous for bogwood sculptures, where they retrieve prehistoric tree stumps and woods from the peat bogs in the area and create the most beautiful carvings and statues from the bogwood. And you will find them all over Newton Cashel and that part of Ireland, and they are absolutely beautiful. And there was a wonderful person called Michael Casey who really sort of developed the art, and his workshop, I think, is still there, is run by his son now. And if ever you want to have a look up Michael Casey's bogwood sculptures on Google or wherever, and they are well worth seeing. They're completely beautiful. So I was lucky enough, as I say, to stay in County Longford on the edge of Loch Ree, which is right in the centre of Ireland. So I was able to fan out from there and visit most places pretty much in a day most of the time. And so I thought I would tell you a little bit about some of the places that really captured me, that I can remember more than anything else. Some of my favourite places I would love to go back to again. I've already talked about the cliffs of Moher on the west coast in County Clare, which are the tallest cliffs in Europe and fall over 600 feet straight to the sea. And as I say, you look out across the sea, you can see the Aran Islands in the distance, and you can look up towards the mountains of Connemara. And just knowing that that America is the next place you come to is a rather wonderful feeling. And the west coast is gorgeous. We have some beautiful golf courses. And I remember I had the best sea swim I've ever had in my life off the coast of Galway. The water was warm because we have something called the Gulf Stream, which is a warm current that washes up against the the west coast of Ireland, and keeps it warm, wet, but warmer than it might otherwise be at that northern latitude. And I had the most gorgeous swim in the sea. It was turquoise, it was sandy, you could see to the bottom. There were the mountains of Connemara in the distance, and it was warm, and it was an experience I will never forget. It just the most wonderful experience, and that seemed to me very much an Irish thing to do, just soft and gentle and beautiful and friendly. And of course, the pubs and the music over on the West Coast are particularly fine. And that is something I'll never forget. Sitting in an Irish pub on the west coast of Ireland, listening to the music, the wonderful music, is again an experience one will never forget. But some of the other places, one of the places that that really affected me was the Rock of Cashel, which is in County Tipperary, and it's a rock that rises out of the ground and is topped by a series of very ancient buildings. And very often when you go to a place you've read about, you can be slightly disappointed. But the Rock of Cashel is one place that exceeded my expectations. It was the most beautiful, striking, extraordinary place to see. It was a seat of the kings of Munster for 500 years before the Norman invasion in the 12th century. And it's supposed to be one of the places where St. Patrick used a shamrock to illuminate the Trinity. And it's got on top of it's got an old cathedral. It's got something called Cormac's Chapel, which was named after King Cormac, a king of Munster called Cormac, who built the chapel. And it is the most, I think it's the loveliest building in Ireland. It's a beautiful Norman Romanesque building, still in fine condition, and surrounded by other buildings. There's a cathedral and there's a round tower, and from a distance all these buildings create the most wonderful skyscape, with the round tower and the Norman buildings, and it is really somewhere that that you take right to your heart. So if ever you get a chance to go and see the Rock of Cashel in County Tipperary, it's an experience you will never forget. And another thing I enjoyed doing was kissing the Blarney Stone. I don't know whether you've heard of kissing the Blarney Stone. Apparently, if you kiss the Blarney Stone, it gives you the power of great eloquence. And so, but actually kissing the Blarney Stone is very, very difficult because it's the top of Blarney Castle on the roof, and you have to lie down and face up and sort of maneuver yourself under the parapet while somebody's holding your legs so you don't fall off, and then kiss the Blarney Stone, which is hanging out across the parapet. And the tradition came from an owner of the parapet of Blarney Castle called Dermot McCarthy, who managed in the days of Elizabeth I, the Queen of England, Elizabeth I, managed to persuade her not to take over Blarney Castle, which she was wont to do, because he just went on talking and talking and talking until the end she said, "Oh, this is all just Blarney. He's never going to do it. I might as well go away." So he was, having kissed the Blarney Stone, he was persuasive enough to persuade Elizabeth I not to ransack his castle, and that's hence. So now if you kiss the Blarney Stone, you become very eloquent and very persuasive, and it's a fun thing to do, and one of the things you must do when you go to Ireland. Another place that I remember well is Newgrange in County Meath. It's in the Boyne Valley, the valley of the River Boyne, and the River Boyne is where the first Irish settlers sailed up and settled in the lovely, lush, fertile grounds of lands of County Meath, which was good for farming, and where they've left many of their burial chambers and temples. And Newgrange is probably the best preserved passage grave in Europe. It's a circular mound with a stone passageway that leads to a central chamber. And during the winter solstice, on the winter solstice, which is the 21st of December, the rising sun shines through a sort of skylight above the main entrance, all along the passageway, and illuminates the central passage, which is full of the most wonderful art and carvings on the stones inside. And it's the most magnificent experience. I've never done it myself, but I've known people who have. And you have to book. You can book to go inside the central room on the solstice, which is the most wonderful experience, I'm told, and it's something I would love to do. But you have to book, and it's taken by lottery because so many people want to do it. That is one thing I hope to go back and do one day when I go back to Ireland. And nearby is another chamber called Knowth, which has something like a third of all the megalithic art known in the world in its one chamber, and including the oldest known illustration of the moon. And both Knowth and Newgrange date back to about 3200 BC, so they're in fact older than the pyramids and older than Stonehenge, which is the famous stone circle in England. And again, this is the most wonderful experience. If you stand there, as it were, and you can imagine how our ancestors lived, and they were quite advanced. And these beautiful, wonderful chambers have been beautifully preserved. And you can spend days just wandering around all these different Neolithic chambers. Well worth doing. Well worth doing. Another place that I absolutely loved was a place called Clonmacnoise, which is a funny name, but that's how it's pronounced, Clonmacnoise, which is set in a bend of the River Shannon, which is Ireland's longest river, in County Offaly, or Offaly, and it was founded in 544 by a chap called St. Kieran, and it's a religious site that has the remains of 2 round towers and 8 churches, and the largest collection of grave tablets in the whole of Europe. And it's got 2 beautiful doors in the ruins. One of them in a door of the ruined cathedral is known as the Whispering Door. And if you stand underneath the Whispering Door and whisper, you can be heard for literally miles around, because the sound travels along the river and over the fields. And the other door is, I think, the most beautiful door in Ireland, if not the whole of Britain and Ireland, is a beautiful 11th century Norman doorway to something called the Nuns' Church. And if you look through the nuns' doorway into the church, you see a chancel arch framed, and then you see the river and the trees beyond, and it's the most beautiful picture. And that again is something I can remember. And while one's doing these things, one is very aware of a sense of peace. Ireland is particularly as you go further west, central and west, is the most amazingly peaceful place, where time seems to slow down. Everybody is extraordinarily friendly. Everybody just lets you do what you want to do, and it's immensely quiet and peaceful and slow. As I say, time seems to slow down, and that is one of the magical properties of Ireland, is that it seems to take you into another time frame, where what's important is what's in front of you, and the rest of the world seems to fade away into the Irish mist and become very much less important. And that's one of the medicines that Ireland provides for you. The scenery in County Donegal, which is up on the northwest of Ireland, I seem to remember, it's wild, with mountains and plains, and it's again, there's practically nobody in County Donegal. I think it's the least inhabited part of Ireland, and it's wild and majestic, and it rains quite a lot, but when the sun comes out, it's just all the more magnificent. So I think time spent in County Donegal is time very well spent. And somewhere slightly different is right at the centre of Ireland is a town called Birr, B-I-R-R, An Emmet Square, which is the town square in the centre of Birr, is the geographical centre of Ireland. And it feels like it. It's bustling. It's much more crowded, perhaps, than some of the rest of Ireland that one notices. And it centres around Birr Castle, which was built by the Parsons family. In fact, Birr used to be known as Parsons Town, but it's now called Birr. And this again is in County Offaly. And the castle is not open because it's still a family home, but the gardens are magnificent. And a walk round the gardens takes you past some wonderful scientific artifacts, because the Parsons were a very scientific family. And if you walk around the gardens at Birr, you can find the oldest iron bridge in Ireland, which was built in 1820 and put up by the Parsons. You can find the world's tallest box hedges, which are up to 40 feet high and 300 years old. You can find a reconstruction of the Leviathan telescope, which, when it was built in 1845, was the largest telescope in the world and remained so until 1917. It was built by William Parsons. And oh yes, there's a series of wonderful waterfalls in the garden. And one of them was harnessed by Lawrence Parsons in 1879 to create hydroelectricity, with which he lit both Birr Castle and the town of Birr. And this possibly makes Birr the first town in the world ever to have been lit by electricity. And there's a little reconstruction of the mill wheel that's there still to this day. And also William Parsons, who made the telescope, his wife was a famous early photographer, and her darkroom, as she had it, remains in the castle, and it's known to be the oldest surviving darkroom in the world. And they were a remarkable family. And in the town of Birr is the Irish Science Museum, which has the history and examples of many Irish inventions, because the Irish were a very inventive people, and they've invented, there was a chap called John P. Holland who invented the submarine. He was born in Liscannor, near the Cliffs of Moher in County Clare, and he invented the Holland submarine, which was the first submarine used by both the American navies, the US navies, and the British Navy, and the Japanese Navy. And Holland number 1, you can see a copy of Holland number 1, I think, in Annapolis, perhaps, in the United States. I'm not sure about that. I'd have to ask you about that one. But so there was John P. Holland, who invented the submarine. There was a chap called James Hoban from County Kilkenny, and he designed the White House. He based the design of the White House on Leinster House in Dublin, which is where the Dáil, or the Irish Parliament, sits. And he designed the White House, the original White House, which of course was burnt down in 1812, but was reconstructed. And talking of there are more inventors that one doesn't know about. There was a chap called Lewis Brennan from Castlebar in County Mayo, who invented the first guided missile. It was a type of torpedo that you steered by wires, and that was adopted by many navies throughout the world as well. There was a chap called Francis Rind, who was a doctor from Dublin, and he invented the hypodermic syringe because he had a patient who had pain in her face and tablets didn't work, so he decided to inject the morphine directly onto the nerves, and it worked very well. So that was the hypodermic syringe. There was a chap called James Martin from Crossgar in County Down who invented the ejector seat, so that when your plane is crashing, you can get out of the plane before it hits the ground. And apparently that saved something like 10,000 lives of airmen since it was invented. Harry Ferguson, who invented the modern tractor, the style of tractor that we see today, and he also invented four-wheel drive, which he put into a car called a Jensen, and it was known as a Jensen FF for Ferguson Formula, which is an early form of four-wheel drive. And there was a chap called Aeneas Coffey, who came from Dublin, and he invented the first heat exchange device, which is used in distilling Irish whiskey. And Irish whiskey, of course, is one of the delights of Ireland, and particularly they think that the Irish had whiskey before the Scottish. They think that the Irish monks were distilling what they called aquae vitae, the water of life. And Irish whiskey is, as opposed to Scotch whiskey, Irish whiskey is distilled 3 times, which makes it softer than Irish whiskey, which is distilled than Scottish whiskey, which is distilled 2 times, and is slightly rougher than Irish whiskey. And of course, Ireland has up in County Antrim, Bushmills Distillery, which is the world's oldest licensed distillery, which was licensed in 1608. And all Irish whiskies are utterly delicious. And again, something Ireland is famous for, and quite rightly so. And yet, while we're talking about Irish people, of course, there are 23 US presidents who have Irish heritage. 23, so that's almost half of American presidents have Irish heritage, including Ulysses S. Grant, Theodore Roosevelt, Harry Truman, John Kennedy, of course, John F. Kennedy, Johnson, Nixon, Ford, Carter, Ronald Reagan, the Bushes, Joe Biden, of course, present president, and Barack Obama, whose family, whose ancestor Fulmouth Kearney emigrated from Moneygall in County Offaly. So there's a great Irish heritage, as we know, in America. Something like 40 million in the Irish diaspora in America. So the connections between Ireland and the US are very, very strong, and very close. And the Irish have done much to help build America in many ways. And I think the other thing about Ireland that I love is the coastline is gorgeous. I think if you driving the coast of County Antrim up in the north and the northeast is one of the great coastal drives in the world. I think it can compete with anywhere. And the drive of the County Antrim coast takes you past the Giant's Causeway, which is a wonderful feature of hexagonal basalt columns, which form marvelous shapes that you can sit in and jump over and walk around. It's one of the most extraordinary, it's a World Heritage Site and is one of the most extraordinary places you can visit. Also, there is Bushmills Distillery up there, which we've talked about. There's the wonderful Carrick a Reed rope bridge, which is a rope bridge slung 100 feet across above the Atlantic Ocean, crossing from the mainland to a little island. It was built by salmon fishermen in 1755 and has been restored. You'll be relieved to hear since then, but that is a wonderful experience and quite a
We are experiencing some technical issues at this moment. Please stand by as we recover from these issues. Thank you.
I'm not muted. I'm not muted this end. So I hope you can all still hear me.
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Oh, good. Sorry about that. And what, as well as writing I Never Knew That About Ireland, I've also written I Never Knew That About the Irish, which tells you some wonderful stories about some of the remarkable Irish people that have gone out into the world and done many good things. And of course, perhaps one of the most famous is St. Patrick, who came across to Ireland in the 5th century and really established Christianity in Ireland, which Christianity in Ireland had been established a little before, because I think a lot of the Christians in the Roman times had been forced westwards, either into Wales and the west of the British Isles, and then over the sea into Ireland. And also the Saxons, when they invaded England, they pushed many of the Christian Celtic peoples to escape to Ireland, who brought Christianity with them. And as I said in the preface, one of the wonderful things was that Ireland was a beacon of knowledge and Christianity and hope when the rest of the European continent was going through the Dark Ages. And St. Patrick was a great example of that. And another of the wonderful experiences you can have in Ireland is to climb Croagh Patrick, which is a mountain on the west coast of Ireland in County Mayo, which is where St. Patrick was supposed to go to the top and fast for 40 days. And while he was there, he was apparently drove all the snakes out of Ireland. Which is why you never find any snakes in Ireland. Now, whether this is apocryphal or not is the historians are not quite sure, but it's certainly true that there are no snakes in Ireland. And I think it's a lovely story that makes perfect sense, that St. Patrick drove all the snakes out of Ireland, for which I'm very grateful personally, not being very fond of snakes. And another of the books I've written is I Never Knew That About New York, which of course has a great Irish heritage. And last time I was in New York was on St. Patrick's Day and the St. Patrick's Day Parade, which is the most extraordinarily inspiring and uplifting occasion when everybody thoroughly enjoys themselves. And it's amazing that wherever you go in the world, even as far as Japan or South America, wherever you go in the world, you will always find an Irish bar, which is the friendliest place you can hope to go to. And there are some, my favorite place that about Ireland with you when you go around Ireland. She said it's like traveling with an old friend who loves Ireland and entertains you with interesting stories. And that, to me, absolutely sums up what I was trying to achieve with I Never Knew That About Ireland. And I hope I've just been able today to give you just a little glimpse of some of the places that really I took to heart when I was traveling around Ireland, and some of the characters that one meets. I say everybody in Ireland is so friendly. This is the first thing that strikes you. And you find within 5 minutes of talking to anybody, particularly if you go into an Irish pub, that you're talking to them as though they're your oldest friend and they've known you for years. And there's no embarrassment and there's no introductions needed. They just talk and they tell you wonderful stories. I got all my stories virtually from just going around and talking to Irish people. And I hope I've been able to give you a flavour of what it's like to explore Ireland as somebody who hasn't known it very well and now knows it and loves it very well indeed. And if anybody has any questions, I'd be very happy to try and answer them for you.
Well, at this time, Christopher, thank you again so much for presenting today. You had a lot of insightful stories. We were unfortunate in being cut off at one point where you were starting to tell us the story about the Irish pub, and you were saying that they were the pub is like one of the friendliest places in the world to be. Could you start back over on that point of the story that you were telling about the pubs, please?
Yes, of course. Mainly, I think I started talking about the pubs when I was talking about the west coast of Ireland, because it's particularly the pubs on the west coast of Ireland where, and that's what you do for entertainment of an evening. And you can walk into any pub in any town on the west coast of Ireland and get the most wonderful warm welcome. There's always music, there's always live music going on. There's always wonderful Irish beer, of course, and everybody just welcomes you in, puts their arm around your shoulder and welcomes you in like you're an old friend, and you become part of the entertainment and part of the evening. And they'll spin stories, they'll play their instruments, they'll sing songs for you, and it's the most joyous thing that you can do, the most joyous experience that you can have is, and I could spend all as much time as possible in Irish pubs, particularly on the west coast, but then wherever you go in Ireland too. And what it does remind me, of course, is that I haven't talked a little bit about Dublin, which I think is one of the world's favorite cities, and quite rightly so. And the pubs reminded me of Dublin because there's a wonderful area next to the River Liffey in Dublin called Temple Bar, where most of the pubs and the clubs and the entertainments and the galleries are. And again, you go in there and it's just like going to a party with friends. And everybody, sometimes if you go to in a pub in England, perhaps, to a local pub, that everything, when you walk in, the conversation stops and everybody sort of looks at you. So, what are you doing here and why have you come here and that sort of thing. Whereas Ireland, you're just accepted straight away. Everybody, as I say, puts their arm around your shoulder, sings you a song, buys you a drink, tells you a story, and it's one of the joys of Ireland, that. And as I say, you can find Irish bars all over the world, which are exactly the same. So I hope that's caught you up on the bit that you might have missed out on.
Yes, I do have a question that's come from the chat. And they say that they're visiting Dublin, Ireland in June. Besides pubs, are there any recommendations in Dublin for their visit?
Well, it slightly depends on what you want, but there's lots of art galleries, and that's in Temple Bar, particularly, which is the area I've just talked. The two cathedrals, Christchurch Cathedral and St. Patrick's Cathedral, are well worth visiting. They're most gorgeous. Christchurch is the oldest cathedral. St. Patrick's is the largest, but they are the most beautiful cathedrals. Walk across the Liffey on the Halfpenny Bridge, which is a beautiful, slender bridge, which used to cost you a halfpenny, which is a half penny, which is an old type of coin. which used to cost you a halfpenny to cross, but it gives you the most wonderful view of all the beautiful buildings, most of which line the banks of the River Liffey. And it gives you a most wonderful overview of Dublin. And I was thinking, Dublin has got some wonder. It's got the it's famous for its Georgian terraces, lovely squares and terraces of Georgian houses, which are worth seeing. It's got Phoenix Park, which is the largest urban park in Europe, with beautiful trees and plants and a lovely place, restful place to stay. You should try and have a look at Trinity College University, which is Ireland's oldest university and has some beautiful buildings around it. I think really you just want to walk. Dublin's a city for walking around. It's all quite compact in the centre, and O'Connell Street is the main street, which has some lovely buildings along it. But I think the thing to do is walk around Dublin, and you'll come across places that you'll want to see more of, and places that you'll want to go back to, and places that you'll recognise. And I think that's the recommendations for Dublin, which there's a one of my little stories I like is St. Valentine's, the saint, is buried in a Carmelite church in Whitefriars Street in Dublin, and St. Valentine was a priest in Roman, I think it was the 3rd century in Rome, who encouraged people to marry at a time when the emperor Claudius II had banned marriage because he thought it distracted men from becoming soldiers and defending the empire. So St. Valentine was eventually arrested and beaten to death in, I think it was AD 269. And then a later pope donated St. Valentine's relics to this church to thank the priest who had been doing good works throughout Ireland. And there's a lovely story is that when St. Valentine was in prison, he healed a girl who was blind. He enabled her to see again. And the first thing she saw was a note that he had written to her saying, I'm so glad I can help you, everything. And I wish you all the best love for the rest of your life, from your darling Valentine. And that's where the first Valentine cards came from. So I always think that's rather remarkable that the relics of St. Valentine are in Dublin. And another little story I like about Dublin is that the word quiz was invented in Dublin. It was back in 1769, I think, and a theatre manager called James Cayley took on a bet that he could introduce a new word into the language in 24 hours. So he got all his friends to go around Dublin and scroll the word quiz on walls and pavements and roads. And in 24 hours, everybody was going, quiz, what does it mean? Why quiz? Why quiz? And that is where we get the word quiz from today. And that was invented in Dublin too, along with many other things. And the MGM lion was a lion called, I can never pronounce his name, but it's Cerdra or something like that, who was in Dublin Zoo. And he became the MGM lion, the start of MGM films. So there are lots of wonderful stories about Dublin. But as I say, the best way to explore Dublin and to find out what you want to do in Dublin is to walk.
Absolutely fascinating stories. I mean, I'm just fascinated by the stories that you're telling. From someone who loves trivia and has spent years on quiz bowl teams, knowing the meaning of the word quiz and where it's originated from. Someone just wanted you to know that they very much appreciate you sharing how the word quiz, the origin of quiz, and that is associated with Dublin. So thank you for that. Where does the expression luck of the Irish come from?
That is a very good question. I'm not sure I can give you a definitive answer on that, but I think it's there. It may be something to do with St. Patrick, but I think also that the Irish do seem to be in many ways a lucky people in that they're lucky to live in such a beautiful country. They're lucky to be such friendly, warm people and easy to get on with. And I know in history and things, there's been a lot of, they've had hard times in many, many ways. But I think the luck of Irish is the fact that they rise above all the hardships. They rise above them and get on with life and appreciate life and sing. And rather than wallow in the hardships or their misfortunes and things, they sing about them, and they make themselves and other people feel better when things are going wrong. And I think that partly comes from just the beautiful soft countryside they live in, and the fact that they've had to get on with life through various hardships. And I think that may be where the luck of the Irish comes from.
Very good question, and I do appreciate that answer. And they're also, aside from it being a beautiful scenery, they're also very beautiful people in Ireland. Could you tell me a little bit about some Irish people that are known for their beauty, as far as either movie stars or models or
Um,
historically?
Gosh, that's difficult. I think Maureen O'Hara was a movie star who was particularly renowned for her beauty, and of course, the Irish are renowned for their red hair, their gorgeous, luscious red hair. And I think a lot of the film stars, there are some very handsome. There is a Peter O'Toole. I don't know whether you know him as a famous
Yes.
film star. Yes. Um, and I'm just trying to think. There's another flame-haired Irish actress, and I can't remember her name. It'll come to me in a minute. But and of course there was the lovely, who was the actress who married the prince in Monaco. Um, she was gorgeous. Grace Kelly. Grace Kelly. She wasn't
Yes.
flame-haired, she was blonde, but she was, I think, one of the most beautiful actresses of all time. And something to do with the Irish air, I think. And the Irish water is apparently gives you a wonderful complexion. And so I can't think of any more right at the moment, but if you think of a beautiful actress, they're very often the chances that they will have come from Ireland, and indeed handsome actors as well. Pierce Brosnan, famous, who played James Bond amongst other things, very good looking. Um, and again, I think it's something to do with the atmosphere, the water, um, and the soft sort of lushness of Ireland. It seems to come out in its people.
And you were talking a little bit about St. Patrick's and how legend has it that he ran all of the snakes out of Ireland. Is that still true to this day?
Um, there are still no snakes in Ireland. Your sort of rather austere historian would say there never were any snakes in Ireland because they couldn't swim there. But I much prefer the story that St. Patrick rid Ireland of the snakes. So whichever it is, there are no snakes in Ireland and never have been, which is one of the places I say for me makes it a wonderful place to go because I'm not fond of snakes.
I think a lot of people are. um, and I'm looking here to see if there are any other questions.
Of course, being no snakes in Ireland might be one of the reasons for the luck of the Irish.
I was going to say the same thing. That's a part of luck, is having no snakes.
Absolutely.
Are there any other questions from the chat? Let's see. I do believe I have a question here. Let me check here. Okay, I just have a comment about the Blarney Stone. I have someone that was talking about the Blarney Stone. They kissed the Blarney Stone, and they said the whole country is full of very friendly people, and that the cliffs of Moher are amazing. And they were very fortunate to be able to visit there. Is it a arduous trip to get to kiss the Blarney Stone, or
No, it's
is
not
it
an
like in a remote area?
No, it's not in a particular remote area. It's fairly central in Ireland. And the roads are actually very good in Ireland. They didn't used to be, but they are now very good in Ireland. You get to most places fairly quickly. But you do have to climb to the top of the Blarney Castle Tower. And as I say, it's the actual kissing of it can be quite arduous because you have to lie down, face up, get somebody to hold on to your legs, then push yourself out underneath the parapet and raise your head and kiss the stone. As I'm sure the person who's I think, is it Carol, who wrote about kissing the Blarney Stone, she will probably say that that's true, but well worth doing, and definitely something you should do if you go to Ireland, because then you hopefully will be able to talk about your trip very eloquently when you come home.
And what is a good reason that you can think of for people to move to Ireland?
Gosh, there are so many reasons to. Well, the beautiful countryside for a start, the friendliness of the people. It's not a particularly expensive country. I think it's quite expensive to buy a house now, which it didn't used to be, but it's not a particularly expensive country once you're there. The food is gorgeous, the beer is gorgeous, the whiskey is gorgeous, so you've got wonderful fare. The towns are very livable. Then none of them are too big or too city-like. They're very friendly. They've got all the amenities that you could possibly need. It's relatively easy now, particularly to get to and from Ireland. Of course, in the olden days when flights started, you had to fly to America from Britain via Ireland, and you had to stop off at an Irish airport, Shannon Airport or wherever. And of course, the first transatlantic flight landed in Ireland on the west coast in Galway. Alcock and Brown, who the first people to fly the Atlantic from America to Ireland, they landed in Ireland. So it's always been a place of interest for flight, but it is relatively easy to get to nowadays. And so it's accessible, it's beautiful countryside, it's friendly, it's not overly expensive. And if you want to live somewhere and it's also peaceful, it's quiet. Although it's accessible, it's peaceful and quiet, and you feel slightly you're away from the rest of the world, which is rather a nice feeling if you want peace and quiet.
How long is the flight to Ireland, like from London, and then if you know from New York?
Well, London to New York is about 7 or 8 hours, isn't it? So I think you can fly direct to New York from Ireland, from Shannon, and I think at least. So it would be about 7 hours, 6 or 7 hours is the flight time, which is not too bad. I'm not very good at long flights, the sort of 12 hours or more, but it's a relatively easy flight to New York from Ireland.
Not as bad as I thought it would be. So that's good.
That is
Um,
good, yes.
yes, I'm going to, if there are no more questions, I'm going to turn it over to Lisa Coffey now for a moment so that she can announce the winners of the prize, the three winners that we have. Lisa, are you ready?
Yes, I am ready. It's actually four winners though. I do believe I'm just hearing that we are going to have four winners. And I have Jay Bland, Angelina Harvey, Deborah Chance, and Cindy Roebuck. So, would they get with you, Wendy, to coordinate that? Stop by your office, or you reach out to them?
They can send an email to either to me wendy.wills@nc.gov, or to Gina Streety,
Okay.
regina.streety@nc.gov. One of the two of us, and they will receive their prize. And I have a couple of people that are very excited. One of the winners actually is of Irish descent, so she is extremely excited. So we do have some four winners, and I am reminded that you need to send that to Gina Streety, and I'm going to post her email address here for everyone here in just a moment.
Well, I would like to say I wish I had won, but I will go buy my copy because it might be the closest I get to go to Ireland. But I think the books sound wonderful, and um, not being able to travel as much as I would love, I think I will be buying a book.
Excellent. Excellent. Well, congratulations to all the winners. And I hope they enjoyed the book, and I hope it gives you an insight into Ireland.
And you've given us a lot of insight into Ireland, and you made me really want to visit as well as I get back into traveling now since the pandemic. And I'd like to thank you for all of your wonderful stories that you have for us today. It's given us again a great deal of insight on Irish life, and you're full of knowledge and a lot of history about Ireland. And we're glad to have had you here today to inform us about Ireland. And when you say I didn't know that about Ireland, you've given us a lot of facts and things that we did not know, and we're grateful for that. And on behalf of the Office of State Human Resources in the state of North Carolina, again, Mr. Wynn, I would like to thank you for presenting today. And I would just like to say that we are celebrating Irish American Heritage Month this month, and we would like to continue celebrating throughout the month and throughout the year. And we were excited to have you here today, and we will look into your book and wish you good luck on your future endeavors. And at this time, we are going to close out the ceremony, and this is the conclusion of our two-part series on Irish American Heritage Month. Thank you, and have a good day.
Thank you.
Thank you again, Mr. Wynn. It's been a pleasure.